Reconciliation to God is an explicitly one-sided process. He does practically everything, and all that we have to do is to respond. Because you can make something reconcile by making all of the adjustments just on one side of the chart. If this side is out of balance, you make adjustments to that side to make it come into balance and match this. And that's how reconciliation is done. So God has the capacity to reconcile the world to himself without the world having doing anything but agree to the reconciliation. And God does it all by himself, and we don't even have to do anything on our side. We are not saved by works, lest any man should boast. It is by the grace of what he has already done for us. We're saved by grace through faith, and not of works, lest any man should boast. So our salvation of reconciling us back to God had nothing to do with who we are. Reconciliation, God made adjustments on one side himself. He did all of the work, and all we had to do was just agree to it and just receive it. And I think we ought to thank God for reconciling us. For paying our debt for us, settling the account, reestablishing a close relationship between us. See, God is too holy to come in contact with sin, and our sins have estranged us from God. And so, because God was too holy to become contaminated with the sinfulness of mankind, he had to create a mediator to be able, a go-between, so that he can have contact with his people. And so Jesus became our mediator, so that we did not contaminate the holy. Holy means set apart. It means sanctified. This thing, God is holy. God is holy. God's holy mountain, when his presence came down on Mount Sinai, he said, listen, I don't even want married folks having relations with their spouses around my holy mountain. God is holy. He's holy. He is holy. There's certain things that God says, if you touch me, you will defile the holiness, the sanctity of who I am. So when we are laden with sin, God has to send Jesus in to sanctify us, to cleanse us, to wash us by his own blood. And he did that. He did that so that we could be reconciled. He did all of the work on one end, and we didn't have to do anything. And we are such a blessed people. He does practically everything, and all that we had to do was to respond. So when you talk about reconcile, to reestablish close relationship between, to settle or to resolve or to make compatible or consistent. Another part of that word there is the word conciliate. Say conciliate. Conciliate means to overcome the distrust or animosity of. To conciliate means to overcome the distrust or animosity of. There are some people who are married that need to be conciliated, because they have not been able to overcome the distrust. And part of the word reconcile comes from the Latin word calare, which means to call, to call. It means to let down. It means to allow to hang free. It means to loosen. It means to loosen. So reconciliation always requires someone to make a call. Someone has to make a call. And so when God got ready to reconcile the world, he called us out of darkness into his marvelous light. Everything in the economy of God begins and ends with a call. God calls us into the ministry. He calls us into the service of the Lord. And the last call that you'll ever get is a call to come home. You get called into being a witness for him. We get called into being a missionary. Everything in the economy of God, because we're called to do it. If you do something great in the world, it's because God called you to do it. Because he called you to sing. Because he called you to dance. Because he called you to cook. Because he called you to watch over children. Because he called you to go into business. Because he called you to go into law. God calls us. That's what a vocation is. It is a calling. It is a state of being called. A vocation is a calling. You ought to be doing your work that you do in order to make your living. You need to be able to get into your calling. I know that you can't always do it immediately, but you got to do what you got to do until you can do what you want to do and what you're called to do. But you're working on a call. when you're being reconciled. Reconciled. Every reconciliation is connected to a call. It's connected to a call. And then notice this word reconcile, kalari, which also means to let down. When that word's talking about to let down, to me that speaks of humility. It speaks of humility. Humility always lowers its guard. Humility comes off of its high horse. Now here's why I'm saying this. Humility is being down to earth. It allows itself to hang free. See, this is a part of this kalari. That's a part of the word reconcile. It's about being able to just be down to earth, because you don't want to reconcile with anybody who's stuck up. And somebody has to come off of their high horse if you're going to reconcile. Because I ain't going to speak to him because he was wrong. No, let him come and apologize to me. And when nobody in the other person, she ain't going to come, she was wrong, she going to come and ask me to forgive her. I ain't even doing nothing. I'm going to just, it'll be a cold day in hell before And this one won't apologize, and this one won't apologize, because both of them have been hurt and offended, and this one feels as though they are right. And you see, the antithesis of humility is pride. Pride is the strength of sin. There are people that are boneheaded. Touch your neighbor, say, I know this person. And you know, there are some folks that are just, they are too filled with pride to even admit that they were wrong. See, so when you're going to reconcile, it means that somebody comes down off of the high horse of pride. You know that a horse is a symbol oftentimes of pride. That's why Jesus rode in on a donkey, a sign of humility, because he came to reconcile. You can't ride high when you're trying to reconcile people. Are you listening? The world from sin. Nobody wants to reconcile with you when you come in and you're going to act like you God's gift to the whole world. You got to come in and say, well, excuse me. I just really didn't mean to offend you. I mean, you know that I love you and I respect you. I mean, you got to come off of your high horse to be able to see good in other people. There are some folks that can't see good in other folks because they're too stuck on looking at themselves. And so you have to be able to come down off of that so that you forget about yourself and you're able to see something good in your neighbor. It takes humility to be able to look at ornery people and find something good that you can speak life to and compliment and express your love and your respect and your admiration in some degrees. To be able to restore the relationship, it takes humility. It takes humility. Humility is this coming down, because we don't want to reconcile ourselves to anybody who's arrogant. Arrogance is a turnoff. Arrogance runs people away. And it says, you know what? I mean, I've met people that were stars, and sometimes they were so arrogant, as though they were God's gift to the world, that it just messed up your image of them, and you didn't even like them anymore. You might have been a fan, but once you saw their level of arrogance, it turned you off. And so if you're going to be reconciled, somebody has to come down, and somebody has to make the call. We're called to be reconciled, and then somebody has to come down in order for that thing to work and allow it themselves to hang free. You got to just say, you know what, we're all human. You know, we said some things that we hurt each other, and you have to come down and to loosen, to be like a solvent. That's what a solvent does. A solvent loosens a clog. It loosens, and that's what it does. It loosens the clog. It goes down the drain. It takes humility to go down. Most people can't undo the clogs because they won't go down the drain. You have to go down the drain, and then you can dissolve the issues that caused the clog. That's what a solvent does. It goes and it breaks down the substances that cause the clog, but it's got to go down the drain. You got to go down before the relationship can come up. And so remember, conciliate means to overcome the distrust or the animosity of. And that means that humility has to be employed so that you come down to earth and you can be transparent and adapt to dissolve any of the clogs that are there. You know, I used to, growing up, my mother was the bookkeeper and accountant for our company, and I was trained as her assistant at a very young age and started doing payroll for the company when I was 12 years old. And she'd bring home things with the general ledger, and we would have all of these checks all over the place and in bank statements, and we'd be doing this reconciliation. And so I learned bank reconciliation before I became a teenager, doing bank reconciliation. And so little did I know that God would take me in a lesson in bank reconciliation at that tender age so that I'd understand spiritual reconciliation today in terms of how God reconciled the world to himself. May I tell you some things that I noted as that young person before I even reached my teenage years dealing with bank reconciliation? Sometimes our balance on our books was different than what the bank statement said because of a number that was transposed, or there was a differing number, like we might have had 172 and the bank had 127. And there was a disparity in the numbers. You know, when we had it as one thing and it was perceived as another. And sometimes the discrepancy was that way because I would note that when the check was written, you know where you write the dollar amount with the numbers, it's like 127. But then when you write the words out, 172 instead of 27. So there was a disparity between the word that was written and the number. And one of us went by the number and the other one went by the words. And it caused a disparity because they were not in agreement, so that through the accounts off balance, when one person perceives things to be one way when in reality it is another, it causes stress in a relationship where the relationship now requires reconciliation, to be reconciled because somebody perceived it the wrong way. Have you ever said something to somebody and it was taken in a way that you didn't send it out? Because they were reading one number and you were reading another number, and you were trying to communicate one number, and sometimes it doesn't come out right and people mistake what we're trying to communicate, and they get the wrong value to what is said and miss the whole message and wind up offended, and now there is distrust in the relationships and sometimes animosity. And that's why reconciliation is necessary to dissolve the distrust and to make us friends again. Another thing that I noticed when I would be doing the bank reconciliation is that sometimes our balance was lower than the bank's balance because we had made deposits that were not reflected on the bank statement. And when that happens, these are called deposits in transit. In transit. That means that this thing is in process. That means that sometimes when you are in relationship and you know you're telling the person, you look so beautiful today. What you looking at anyway? You made a deposit, but you don't see the value of it reflected in the account of the relationship. The deposit is in transit. Are you listening? And so there are some times you pay your tithes and you're expecting the next day to be blessed, but it is a deposit that is in transit. Are you listening? It's in transit. Listen, that's why he said, be not weary in well doing, for you shall reap in due season if you faint not. And you can get discouraged when you are trying to do the best that you know how to do and you're not seeing it, the results, and you don't feel appreciated for what you are contributing to the relationship at all. Anybody know what I'm talking about in this house tonight? I'm just telling you that when that happens, you've been doing good things, you've got deposits in transit. Oh, they have not taken account of it, but it's on its way. You got a seed that is in the ground. This thing is coming back up. It is in transit. It is moving. It is working toward that thing. You've been praying. You've been laboring. God has seen your tears. He has heard your prayers. I don't know who I'm talking to tonight, but I discern that there are some things that are in transit where you have made spiritual deposits and you've not seen that thing reflected on the statement that you have received in in your life, and you're wondering, why is everybody else getting blessed, Lord, and I'm sitting here waiting on mine? But I'm here to declare to you, I know this from experience with bank reconciliation a long time ago, that there are deposits that are in transit.
Thank you for watching Power for Living with Bishop Dale C. Bronner. Join us again next time for Power for Living, where revelation is power. Power for living.